Google has discontinued almost 300 products. Not 30, not even 100. Nearly 300 separate things that Google built, launched, convinced people to use, and then killed. But Google isn't even the worst offender on this list. Because at least Google kills products that aren't working. Some of the biggest companies on the planet have looked at their own best-selling, most beloved, most profitable creations, products that people were literally begging them to keep making, and pulled the plug anyway. Today, we're counting down 20 companies that murdered their own greatest hits. And number 3 isn't just a product that died, it's the moment an entire company forgot what made it worth billions. I make one thing on this channel. I find out exactly what went wrong with the technology that was supposed to change everything. If you want to know why the stuff that was supposed to be the future ended up in a skip, subscribe now. Number 20, Microsoft and the Zune. Microsoft launched the Zune in 2006 to take on the iPod. And honestly, it wasn't a bad player. The interface was genuinely innovative. That typography-heavy design language would eventually inspire Windows Phone. The Zune Pass subscription model let you stream unlimited music for a monthly fee years before Spotify existed. And the Zune HD in 2009 was a genuinely beautiful piece of hardware with an OLED touchscreen. People who owned one loved it fiercely. The problem was that Microsoft arrived 5 years after the iPod had already become a cultural institution. By 2009, the Zune held roughly 2% of the portable player market. Apple had 73%. Microsoft didn't just lose. They showed up to a war that was nearly over, then acted surprised when nobody switched sides. The Zune wasn't killed by being bad. It was killed by being late. Number 19, Toshiba and HD DVD. Toshiba bet hundreds of millions of pounds on HD DVD being the next standard for high-definition home video. On paper, they had every reason to be confident. They launched first. They were cheaper than Sony's Blu-ray. They had Microsoft and Intel backing them. And the picture quality was virtually identical to Blu-ray. Most people couldn't tell the difference on a side-by-side comparison. Then, Sony did something brilliantly ruthless. They put a Blu-ray player inside every PlayStation 3. Suddenly, millions of homes had Blu-ray hardware without even choosing it. When Warner Bros. Switched to Blu-ray exclusively in January 2008, it was functionally over. Toshiba surrendered a month later. Industry analysts estimated the company lost close to $1 billion supporting the format. Every HD DVD disc became a coaster overnight. The technology wasn't the problem. The strategy was. Number 18, Yahoo and Flickr. Yahoo bought Flickr in 2005 for a reported $25 million. At the time, it was the internet's most vibrant photo-sharing community. Professional photographers, hobbyists, Creative Commons advocates, all in one place, sharing millions of images, building something genuinely special. Yahoo proceeded to neglect it for the better part of a decade. They forced Yahoo login credentials on Flickr users, driving away anyone who didn't want a Yahoo account. They starved it of development resources. They ignored the shift to mobile. And then in 2010, 2 Stanford graduates launched Instagram from a 1-bedroom flat. Facebook bought Instagram in 2012 for $1 billion. Yahoo had the exact same opportunity 7 years earlier for a fraction of the price. They just couldn't be bothered to nurture it. Number 17, Palm and webOS. The Palm Pre launched in 2009 with webOS, an operating system that was years ahead of its time. Card-based multitasking, swipe apps away to close them, exactly like every modern phone does now. Wireless charging built in, unified notifications, gesture-based navigation, features that Android and iOS wouldn't properly implement for years. The hardware was elegant, the software was intuitive, and the reviews were overwhelmingly positive. But Palm was running out of money. They couldn't match Apple's marketing budget, and they made the fatal mistake of launching exclusively with a single carrier, limiting their reach from day one. HP bought Palm for $1.2 billion in 2010, launched one webOS tablet, killed it after just 49 days on sale, and wrote off the entire acquisition. An operating system that literally predicted the future, killed by corporate impatience. But here's what nobody talks about. Every single company so far had the right product. Wrong timing, wrong strategy, wrong owner. And it only gets worse from here. Number 16, Kodak and the digital camera. Here's one that still stings. Kodak engineer Steve Sasson built the world's first digital camera in 1975. It was the size of a toaster, captured a black and white image at 0.01 megapixels, and took 23 seconds to record to a cassette tape. It was also quite obviously the future of photography. Kodak's leadership looked at it and decided it threatened their film business, which at the time generated billions in revenue. They buried it. For over 2 decades, Kodak sat on digital imaging technology while Canon, Nikon, and Sony developed it into a global market. By the time Kodak finally committed to digital cameras, the competition had carved up the entire industry. Kodak filed for bankruptcy in 2012. The company that invented the future refused to sell it, and then watched the future destroy them anyway. Number 15, Sega and the Dreamcast. The Sega Dreamcast launched in 1999 with built-in internet connectivity, online multiplayer, and a visual memory unit that was essentially a miniature second screen you could carry around. In 1999, it was genuinely revolutionary hardware. The console introduced online gaming to the masses with titles that showed what connected play could become. But Sega had burned through consumer trust with a string of half-baked add-ons and premature hardware launches. The 32X, the Mega CD, the Saturn. Each one had asked consumers to invest in something Sega would abandon within 2 years. So when Sony announced the PlayStation 2, retailers and consumers simply waited. Why commit to Sega again? Sega discontinued the Dreamcast in 2001 after selling around 10 million units worldwide and exited the console hardware business entirely. The machine that pioneered online gaming was abandoned by the same company that built it. Not because it was bad, but because nobody believed Sega would stick with it. And honestly, they were right not to. Number 14, BlackBerry and the physical keyboard. In 2009, BlackBerry controlled roughly 20% of the global smartphone market. The trackball, the keyboard, the blinking red notification light. BlackBerry wasn't just a phone, it was a professional identity. Entire industries ran on BBM. Bankers, lawyers, journalists. If you were serious about your work, you had a BlackBerry. Then the iPhone happened, and BlackBerry's leadership panicked. Instead of doubling down on what made them indispensable, the physical keyboard, secure messaging, professional tools, they tried to become something they weren't. The BlackBerry Storm, their first touchscreen phone, was universally panned. The touchscreen was so bad it actually clicked when you pressed it, like a giant button. BlackBerry chased Apple's design language while abandoning the niche that had made them essential. By 2016, their market share had collapsed to effectively zero. They didn't lose to the iPhone, they lost to their own fear of the iPhone. Number 13, Microsoft and Windows Phone. Here's the genuinely mad part about this one. Windows Phone was actually good. The tile-based Metro interface was fresh, distinctive, and genuinely easier to navigate than either iOS or Android at the time. The typography was elegant. The integration with Microsoft services was seamless. Critics praised it consistently, but Microsoft couldn't solve the app problem. Developers wouldn't build for a third mobile ecosystem when iOS and Android already dominated. No Instagram, no Snapchat, no proper banking apps. You could have the most beautifully designed phone on the planet, and if it couldn't run the apps your mates used every day, it was useless. Microsoft bought Nokia's handset division for $7.2 billion in 2014. They wrote off $7.6 billion the following year. That's not a typo. The write-off was larger than the purchase price. Windows Phone died not because it was bad, but because the app economy had already chosen its winners. Number 12, Sony and the Walkman. Sony invented portable personal music. Full stop. The original Walkman in 1979 was one of the most transformative consumer products ever created. It changed the way human beings moved through the world by adding a personal soundtrack to everyday life. Sony owned this entire category for 2 decades. Then the iPod arrived in 2001, and Sony's response was catastrophic. They insisted on their proprietary 8-track audio format instead of simply supporting MP3, the format everyone was already using. They tied their players to Sonic Stage, transfer software so clunky and unreliable it made iTunes look elegant. They made these decisions because Sony's music label division, Sony Music, was terrified of piracy and demanded control over how files move between devices. So Sony's hardware division, which should have been innovating freely, was hamstrung by its own sister company's paranoia. Apple walked right into Sony's house and took everything. The company that invented portable music became irrelevant in the market it created, because one half of Sony refused to let the other half compete. If you're keeping count, that's 9 companies so far that had a product people genuinely wanted, and found a way to destroy it. Wait until you see the top 6. Number 11, Nintendo and the Virtual Boy. In 1995, Nintendo released the Virtual Boy, a headset that displayed games in monochrome red and black 3D. It was Gunpei Yokoi's creation, the same legendary designer who gave the world the Game Boy. The concept wasn't ridiculous. Virtual reality was a genuine fascination in the mid-90s, and Nintendo wanted to get there first. But the execution was a disaster. The Virtual Boy had no head strap, meaning you had to hunch over a tabletop stand to play. The red and black display caused headaches and eye strain within minutes. And the entire game library consisted of just 22 titles. Nintendo had rushed it to market so Yokoi's team could pivot to developing the Game Boy Pocket. It sold fewer than 800,000 units before being quietly discontinued. The real tragedy wasn't just the commercial failure. It was that Nintendo sacrificed a brilliant inventor's reputation for a product they knew wasn't ready. Yokoi left Nintendo shortly after, and the Virtual Boy became a punchline rather than the stepping stone to VR it should have been. Number 10, Google and Google Reader. Google Reader was the internet's definitive RSS reader, a clean, elegant way to follow every blog, news source, and website you cared about in one place. Millions of people depended on it daily: journalists, bloggers, researchers, the kind of people who shape what the rest of the internet reads and talks about. In 2013, Google killed it, citing declining usage. But here's what makes this one particularly galling. The declining usage was partly Google's own doing. They'd already stripped Reader of its social features, the ability to share articles and follow other users, specifically to push people toward Google+. They cannibalized their own product to feed a social network that was itself dead within 6 years. Google Reader had a small but intensely loyal user base, the kind of users who form the backbone of online discourse. A decade later, they're still angry about it. They have every right to be. Number 9, Microsoft and MSN Messenger. If you grew up in Britain in the early 2000s, MSN Messenger wasn't just software. It was your social life. Custom display names that changed with your mood. Nudges that shook your mate's entire screen. Carefully crafted away messages designed to be read by one specific person. Signing in after school and seeing who was online was a daily ritual for an entire generation. At its peak, MSN Messenger had over 330 million active users worldwide. Microsoft replaced it with Skype in 2013 after buying Skype for $8.5 billion 2 years earlier. But Skype was built for video calls between professionals. MSN Messenger was built for conversation between friends. The warmth, the personality, the sense of community, none of it translated. Microsoft took something intimate and replaced it with something functional. By the time everyone had migrated to WhatsApp and iMessage, Microsoft had lost the messaging space entirely. They owned the social conversation of the 2000s and traded it for a video call app that nobody under 30 uses voluntarily. Number 8, Amazon and the Fire Phone. Amazon launched the Fire Phone in 2014 with a headline gimmick called Dynamic Perspective. The screen tracked your face and created a pseudo 3D effect when you tilted it. It was impressive technically and utterly pointless practically. Nobody had asked for a 3D phone. What people actually wanted was a cheap, reliable handset with seamless Amazon integration, one-tap ordering, Kindle built-in, Alexa before Alexa existed. Instead, Amazon charged flagship prices, locked users out of the Google Play Store, meaning no Gmail, no Google Maps, no YouTube, and delivered a phone that solved a problem nobody had. It sold so poorly that Amazon took a $170 million write-down on unsold inventory within months. The Fire Phone was discontinued inside a year, becoming the most expensive proof that even the world's most successful retailer can build something nobody wants. This next one is going to sting. Number 7, Apple and the iPod Classic. Apple discontinued the iPod Classic in September 2014, and the internet mourned. It was the last iPod with a hard drive, 160 gigabytes of storage, enough for roughly 40,000 songs, your entire music collection in your pocket. No internet connection required, no subscription, no algorithm deciding what you should hear next, no ads between tracks, just your music. Chosen by you, organized by you, owned by you. Apple killed it because the future was streaming. They wanted everyone on Apple Music, paying £10.99 a month for access to a library they'd never own. And commercially, they were right. Streaming generates recurring revenue in a way that selling hardware doesn't. But something real was lost. The iPod Classic represented a specific philosophy, that your music library was an extension of your personality. The 40,000 songs you chose said something about who you were. Streaming gives you 100 million songs and somehow says less. Within a year of discontinuation, used iPod Classics were selling on eBay for double their original retail price, sometimes more. People weren't buying a media player. They were buying back the idea that music could be yours. Apple built the most iconic music device of a generation, defined an entire era of how people experience music, and then killed it because subscriptions were more profitable. The technology was better. The experience was worse. Number 6, Google and Stadia. Google launched Stadia in 2019 with the kind of promise only Google can make. Cloud gaming would make consoles obsolete, no downloads, no hardware limitations. Stream AAA games on a Chromebook, a phone, a telly, anything with a screen and an internet connection. And the technology genuinely worked. The streaming quality was impressive, the latency was manageable, and the Stadia controller was well designed. But Google charged full retail price for games you could only play through their servers. You didn't own anything, you were renting access to software running on Google's hardware. And if Google ever pulled the plug, everything vanished, which is, of course, exactly what happened. Google opened internal game studios in 2019. They closed them in February 2021, barely a year later, before releasing a single game. Then, in September 2022, they announced Stadia itself would shut down in January 2023. Every game every user had purchased simply ceased to exist. Google refunded everything, hardware, games, add-ons, which was decent of them. But it also proved the fundamental problem. If the company that runs the server decides to stop, your entire library disappears overnight. Nearly 300 dead Google products and counting. At this point, Killed by Google isn't a website. It's a genre. Top 5 now. This is where it stops being funny. Number 5, Nokia and Symbian. In 2007, Nokia held over 40% of the global mobile phone market. Close to half of every mobile phone sold on the planet had Nokia written on it. Think about that for a moment. Their Symbian operating system powered the vast majority of the world's smartphones. Nokia wasn't just the market leader. They were the market. Then Steve Jobs walked onto a stage in San Francisco in January 2007 and introduced the iPhone. Nokia's leadership dismissed it almost immediately. Too expensive, no physical keyboard, mediocre battery life, locked to a single carrier. Nokia's CEO reportedly looked at the iPhone's 5% market share at the end of 2007 and saw no threat. Nokia still had 40%. Why worry? Because the iPhone wasn't competing on Nokia's terms. It was redefining what a phone was supposed to be. Nokia kept pouring resources into Symbian, while the world shifted to touchscreens, app ecosystems, and devices that were computers first and phones second. By 2013, Nokia's smartphone market share had fallen below 5%. The company that dominated an entire industry sold its handset division to Microsoft for $7.2 billion, a fraction of its former valuation. Nokia didn't just lose the smartphone war, they stood on the battlefield holding the wrong weapon and refused to pick up a new one until it was far too late. Number 4, Sony and Betamax. Sony created the technically superior home video format and still lost. Betamax had better picture quality than VHS, smaller, neater cassettes, cleaner recordings. By most objective measures, it was the better technology. But Sony kept Betamax proprietary, tightly controlled, licensed restrictively, and manufactured primarily by Sony themselves. JVC took the opposite approach with VHS. They licensed the format to anyone who wanted to manufacture it. More manufacturers meant cheaper players. Cheaper players meant more customers. More customers meant more rental shops stocking VHS. More VHS tapes in shops meant less reason to buy Betamax. The snowball was unstoppable. By the time Sony officially conceded the format war in 1988, VHS controlled over 90% of the market. The pattern Sony established here, technically superior but commercially doomed by proprietary control, would haunt them for decades. A TRAC versus MP3, memory stick versus SD card, mini disc versus, well, everything. Sony kept building beautiful walled gardens that nobody else was allowed into, and they kept watching as the open alternatives ate them alive. Betamax wasn't just a lost format war, it was the original sin that Sony kept repeating. Number 3, Google and Google+. Google+ wasn't just a failed product, it was a product that actively damaged other products. Products that millions of people relied on and genuinely liked. Google was so desperate to compete with Facebook that they forced Google+ integration into everything they owned. You wanted to comment on a YouTube video? You needed a Google+ account. You wanted to leave a review on Google Maps? Google+ account. You wanted to use Hangouts? Google+. They broke perfectly functional systems to inflate the user numbers of a social network that nobody had asked for and nobody wanted to use. YouTube's comment section, already famously chaotic, was made actively worse when Google forced real-name Google+ accounts onto a platform built on anonymity and pseudonyms. The backlash was immediate and furious. Google Photos, initially launched as a Google+ feature, had to be surgically separated from the dying social network when Google finally pulled the plug in 2019. Even Google Reader, number 10 on this list, was partly killed to push users toward Google+'s social features. Google spent years and billions of pounds in engineering talent building a Facebook competitor that peaked at a fraction of Facebook's engagement, and in the process, degraded the experience of products that were working perfectly well without it. That's not just killing your own product. That's friendly fire on an industrial scale. The worst part? Google already had something people loved. Gmail, YouTube, Maps, Search. Nobody was asking for a social network from Google. The demand didn't exist. Google manufactured a solution to a problem nobody had, and then broke their own best tools trying to make people use it. Number 2, Apple and the headphone jack. In September 2016, Apple stood on a stage and removed the 3.5mm headphone jack from the iPhone 7, a universal audio standard that had existed since the 1960s. gone. Every pair of headphones on the planet, every car or cable, every speaker system, every piece of studio equipment, every cheap pair of earbuds you grabbed from a petrol station. All of it suddenly needed a dongle or a wireless connection. Apple's Phil Schiller called it courage. What it actually was a sales strategy. Apple had acquired Beats in 2014 for $3 billion. They were developing AirPods. Removing the headphone jack didn't solve a problem for consumers. It created a market for Apple, and the numbers proved it. AirPods became one of the best-selling consumer electronics products in history, generating tens of billions in revenue. The headphone jack didn't fail. It didn't become obsolete. It was small, universal, completely reliable, required no power, produced no latency, and worked every single time you plugged it in. Apple killed it because wireless earbuds had dramatically higher profit margins. And then every other manufacturer followed, because once Apple set the standard, nobody wanted to be the company still including the old port. Now everyone owns Bluetooth earbuds that need charging every few hours, occasionally desync, have measurable audio latency, cost 10 times what wired earbuds did, and will eventually end up in a landfill when their sealed batteries degrade. The headphone jack worked for over 60 years. Apple decided 60 was enough. Not because there was something better, because there was something more profitable. Number 1, Google and everything. Google has killed nearly 300 products as of 2025. Not services that quietly merged into something else. Not beta experiments that ran for a few months. Nearly 300 distinct products that were built, marketed, launched, and then terminated. 60 apps, over 200 services, 25 pieces of hardware. That's not a statistic. That's a business model. Google Reader, Google+, Google Stadia, Google Inbox, an email client that was genuinely better than Gmail, killed to push people back to Gmail. Google Hangouts, replaced by Google Chat, which was replaced by... Actually, nobody's entirely sure what Google's messaging strategy is anymore. They've launched and killed so many messaging apps that there's a dedicated Wikipedia article just tracking the timeline. Google Allo, Google Wave, Google Glass, Google Nexus, Chromecast in its original form. The list doesn't end because Google never stops adding to it. The company has become so synonymous with killing its own creations that there's a dedicated website, killedbygoogle.com, cataloging every single death. It's a graveyard with nearly 300 headstones, and Google keeps digging new graves. And here's what makes Google the undisputed number 1 on this list. They've done it so often, so casually, and with so little apparent regret that they've fundamentally damaged consumer trust in Google products as a category. When Google announces something new now, a new messaging app, a new hardware device, a new service, the first question from consumers and tech journalists alike isn't, is it any good? It's, how long until they kill it? Google hasn't just killed individual products. They've killed the assumption that a Google product is worth investing in. That's the real cost. Not the dead apps, not the abandoned hardware. The trust. Look, modern tech companies build extraordinary things. The engineering talent at Google, Apple, Microsoft, and Sony is genuinely staggering. But engineering brilliance doesn't protect a product from boardroom impatience, format wars, or the assumption that what's profitable is automatically what's better. Every product on this list worked. Every single one had people who loved it, relied on it, built their habits around it. And every single one was killed not because it failed, but because someone in a boardroom decided it wasn't worth keeping alive. Which company on this list do you think made the worst decision? Which product do you still wish existed? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this is the kind of thing you're into, understanding why the technology that was supposed to change everything ended up dead, hit subscribe. Next week, we're looking at something different. 15 things you owned in your 2000s bedroom that your kids will only ever rent. Number 6 is the one that genuinely hurts. Thanks for watching.